In a second-hand set of dimensions, on an astral plane that was never meant to fly, through wavering star mists, see the Grey Satuin. Drifting onwards through space, atop the shell of the world's turtle, are 4 giant elephants, upon whose broad shoulders rests the Discworld. Welcome to Dining Table Discworld. We're reading through the Discworld novels and discussing them at our dining table. Be aware there will be spoilers for the current book and others in the series.
Hello, welcome to Dining Table Discworld. I'm Dave.
I'm Kathy.
Today we're on book 18 of the Discworld series. We are at A Maskerade, published in 1995. So Kathy, what's our synopsis?
Agnes Nitt has left Lanka and its interfering witches and gone to Ankh-Morpork to find work as a singer. Using the name Perdita, she joins the chorus of the opera house and is asked to lend her impressive vocal talents to help another young lady who is more conventionally attractive. The long-established ghost of the opera house has recently become disturbingly murderous, and Agnes has theories as to his true identity. Meanwhile, Nanny Og is worried about Granny Revelwax, now Magrat is focused on being queen, and their trio's down to 2. So she's glad of Granny's help in getting her due from the unscrupulous publisher of her best-selling cookbook. If a trip to Ankh-Morpork means they run into young Agnes, then all the better. As the bodies pile up, the mystery of the ghost deepens, and much will be revealed before the fat lady sings.
Excellent. What was your thoughts on it?
Of the witch books, I think this and Equal Rights were the ones that I'd only read once. I don't think I'd reread this one very much. Although once I started reading it, I did remember sort of the rough shape of it. I'm not totally sure why. I don't think it appealed to me quite as much. I mean, I like Agnes' later books that she's in. Yeah, I think something about the opera stuff isn't a thing I'm big on, but also in the other books, you've got Agnes and Perdita, sort of that duology is a bit different, and it's kind of in its early stages. I mean, reading it again, it was enjoyable. It was quite fun, but I didn't kind of feel as strongly about it as I do about a lot of the other witch books.
I'm wondering whether it's because it's just telling a story. I know we've talked about the Discworld series where perhaps it's riffed on things and railed against things.
We do seem to come up with that sort of categorisation,
and I think we almost have to insert a third one of him just telling a story, because I do feel like this one is him just telling a story,
which is fine.
Yeah, it's an interesting look. I suppose it's an interesting look at the masks we wear, duologies in things, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, duality is definitely a big part. It's like it starts with 3s, but then it's about 2s for most of the book.
But that's it. It's telling a story. It's not really riffing on opera. The setting is an opera house.
Yeah,
but it's not like soul music where you had the kind of the music entity, and it was kind of and moving pictures where it was riffing off because opera is a thing in the Discworld.
And I mean, well, the other thing I suppose would be theatre, like in Weird Sisters with Hwell and all the Shakespearean stuff. And I mean, part of me wonders if it's just that I get that better, but then you still like that. Although I suppose whether it's like your reaction to Small Gods, because that wasn't the thing you knew much about.
And I mean, I think.
But then Small Gods is obviously a massive exploration of all sorts of stuff about morality. So, and this isn't quite that. I
think for me, I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed the characters.
Various amusing jokes.
Yeah, it's great. Miserable Les.
That's an operetta, as I understand it.
Again, the specifics.
I don't know too much about it.
Has a beginning, middle, and end. It's a good story. It doesn't really move the meta plot a bit.
I think it's more about Agnes.
Yeah, and it's a good read. I think I only read it. This must be only my third time reading it or something like that. So it's not one I've gone back to either. It's certainly one I didn't mind reading and thoroughly enjoyed it. So
I should do it on content name. Oh, well, do it now. Just to say, there is quite a lot of fatphobia in this book, but unlike the previous one, where it was very much just an unpleasant joke, this is kind of an exploration of it, but there is still a lot of it as an assumed baseline. And I wonder if that's put me off a bit.
Possibly.
Obviously, It was published in 95, which meant it was being written in the early 90s. And let's face it, fatphobia was everywhere then.
Yes.
We'll get into that, but that's not a thing I necessarily enjoy. Although, again, there is more nuance to it. But I don't know if maybe that's a bit you know.
Possibly.
But it's having a character I kind of quite liked, and other things kind of beating herself up so much.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's a good story. We see glimpses into more Ankh-Morpork a little bit, but not, massively. We get throwbacks to equal rights and
slightly, yes.
Yeah, but not massively.
I mean, we don't really see Lanka. They seem to do this alternate thing where it's Lanka and then somewhere else, and then Lanka and then somewhere else. I suppose equal rights was a bit of both.
So yeah, I mean, thoroughly enjoyable, but it's just telling a good story.
Yeah.
Okay, so what?
So, well, as I sort of said before, the early part of the book talks about threes. I mean, you've got the whole witch thing, and I mean, I will say this is much more Nanny Ogg's book than some of the previous ones.
Yes.
While obviously one of the three in most of the books really comes to the fore in this one. But she actually considers, you've got the maiden, the mother, and the other one, although she doesn't eventually think crone. And so you've got that kind of, the triple goddess, threes for witches. And in fact, she thinks to herself, when you had three, you had one to run around getting people to make up when there'd been a row. Which is true.
Which is what we saw in Witches Abroad.
Yes, because that was...
No, Nanny Oxford.
Yeah, but I think sometimes it's Maskerade that did that as well. But part of the idea is, Maskerade's not even in it. She's just barely mentioned once, that's it. But... as we said, the book is very much about twos. It's about dualities. It's about
masks.
Yeah.
I think it's called Maskerade, but it's set in an opera.
Yeah, so so we'll probably kind of go for that. I mean, obviously, Nanny and Granny do make quite a good two as well.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, for practical reasons, it doesn't work harmoniously, but they're very good double act through the whole thing. And then you've got Agnes and Perdita, which we'll get to. You've got the ghost and who he is, which we'll get to. But even you've got Grebo.
Yes, very much. He's
cat and man. Now there's a male opera singer who again has a dual thing. We've also got stuff like the other kind of young female character in it besides Agnes is Christine. So as well as Agnes and Perdita, you've also kind of got like Agnes and Christine.
Yeah.
As different versions. So there's just a lot of like doubles in it. Oh, you've also got Salzella and Bucket. So you've got the art director of the opera who's very into... Is the art director musical director?
He's one of the directors. He's not the music director, but... He's
some sort of like creative head person in the opera, and you've got Mr. Bucket who's bought it and is very much the business guy who just thought this would be an interesting retirement project with a bit of kudos to it, and then discovers it's much more complicated and difficult.
Yes, as a lot of arts-based endeavours.
Yes. So I think, as you say, it masks a whole part of it. I suppose, did we want to go into character stuff, or do we want to do the fatphobia, or if I suppose we do Agnes and Perdita, maybe it comes into that a bit?
I mean, we do both at the same time, really, isn't it? So
well, no, I think fatphobia does impact on the characters too. Yeah. Agnes and it, obviously, this girl in Lanka,
who we met last in
Lords and Ladies.
Thank you. I started that sentence so confidently and then got to the actual bit of the information and went, nope, I've forgotten it now. Yes, we last see Lords and Ladies as part of the sort of new witch crowd.
Yeah, well, she's with, is it Desdemona?
Desdemona, yes.
Yeah, well, and so she's going by the name Perdita then, and the idea is all the girls are kind of coming up with other names.
Is it Perdita X Dream?
I mean, if they had forums or DeviantArt or AO3, then that is what she absolutely would have had as her username, but that was not an option for her. She's sort of sitting there, and there's kind of a brief thing when Nanny Ogg notices her, and it's a bit like, oh, she seems sensible, like she's actually got a bit of talent, like she seems like she'd be a reliable witch, rather than being quite so sucked into...
I think Desdemona was had power, but didn't have the kind of witchiness, whereas Angus had talent, which is a slightly different...
Yeah, but I think Agnes... I mean, you live in like a village, or in Lanca's case, a small kingdom, but it's basically like a set of villages. And you become known as like, oh, you're this one, and you want to break out of that. Yeah. That's understandable. I think
very
that's
much,
quite reasonable. But yes, so Agnes is fat, except she's never referred to as fat. There's always a lot of description. It's very expansive, and the joke would be, so is she. Or it's described extensively, and again. So it's the idea that she's obviously especially fat, but there's no description of her actual shape, because it's not like... that's a monoculture. People can be all different shapes within being fat. I mean, also at one point in the book, it describes Nanny as fat.
Yes.
But I think the idea is that she's just regular fat and, Agnes is something else. It's a thing people comment on, but it doesn't seem like it's necessarily a problem. There's a whole bit where there's sort of the narrative voice kind of expounds on in Lanka, like stuff about women being practical and like sturdy and that sort of thing. So, and again, this is supposed to be set in time before the current kind of industrialized Western world we're in, where fat is a problem, a bad word. And but I think the point is that particularly, and she's internalized a lot of bad stuff about herself. So then at one point, Perdita is described as every fat girl has a thin girl inside of her, which again, but that Perdita is it's the name she uses, but also that's maybe something inside of her. So she tries to go by Perdita X, but then people in like it call her Perditax, which Granny says at one point. But Nanny, in fairness, does correct her, because Nanny at least respects everyone's right to recreate themselves, which I think is
very positive. Yes,
and I mean Nanny even thinks of her as being fat. But there's also the idea of like having, she's got good hair and a good personality. And the idea is that these are mitigating factors. Oh, well, yes, she's very big. But she has a lovely personality and good hair. And obviously the voice. And this is the thing, we find that Agnes is incredibly, like almost magically skillful.
Well, I think magically too. So magically, her voice is literally magic. She can harmonise with herself.
Yes. Well,
multiple times.
Yes. Well, there's also the Little Voice thing. Also, you remember the film Little Voice with Jane Horrocks, and because the idea she also has perfect, probably a bit like Tom John actually in Weird Sisters. She can sing it in somebody else's style, but she can actually do their voice. So this is why she's gone to the city to sort of reinvent herself and be a singer, and everyone calls her Perdita because she decided Agnes is a bit. I mean, she's like Agnes Nis. It's not,
Well, I mean, there are worse names.
So the fat phobia in this, I mean, obviously Agnes has internalised it, and the narrative has it very much for a lot of the time. And so when she's thinking about herself, there's this sort of idea that, like at one point, that there's a whole thing about like whether any of the girls in the opera house are in danger from the ghost or anything like that. There's this weird idea that Agnes is like, oh, well, that wouldn't apply to me. Or this idea that she thinks, she wouldn't be able to find a partner. Because she's so fat, she's somehow unlovable, which is obviously incredibly fat phobic and internalised fat phobia that people have because of the fat phobia in our society. Which actually doesn't really make any sense, because if you like look around, the street, the community, the world, plenty of people who are overweight have partners, have love lives, have romances, are able to do things. Her thinking about herself is uncomfortable at first, although it does reach a point, as you sort of said.
Yeah, so it's interesting that we get a lot of these, sentences about how fat she is without saying how fat she is. So it's actually around. In our version, it's page 98. I think you're looking at about a quarter of the way through the book.
Yeah, or a third or something.
Yeah, and it's actually it's discussion between Mr. Bucket, Mr. Undershaft, who's the musical director, and Salazar, who's this kind of creative director, about how opera's sort of changed, how Agnes would be a perfect opera singer in the old days. And now, but now it's the century of the fruit bat, and they have to move on. And in fact, and then Salazar says, it's amazing. Do you think she knows how fat she is? And at that point, all references to Perdita, Angus, size stop.
Yes, well, certainly in the narrative voice, and I mean, and I will say she's not actually in that.
No, she's not. She's not. She's out of the room at that when he says that.
But that's not the only fat joke stuff, though. But yeah, no. I mean, that's the key thing. I think it's been so well established. Okay, yes, we've got it. What I would say is, though, that Agnes is never shown to be unhealthy specifically, because that's always the kind of concern trolly thing. It's like, oh, do you know you're unhealthy? It's like, well,
no, she can get through. She can get through where she needs to go. She's never seen as losing out of breath when she's climbing stairs or
no. There's a bit where she's kind of going through basements and cellars, and there's no suggestion that she can't fit or anything. And yeah, actually, I mean, she's singing in a way that's obviously takes a lot of effort.
Yes.
And that's all fine. And yeah, there's not much about how her moving through spaces is a problem. I don't know about chairs or beds or anything. No. But part of me wonders if that is just Pratchett not necessarily thinking about stuff because it's not like part of his lived experience.
That was potentially.
But there's also a thing like at the end she ends up walking
home
to the mountains. I think there's this weird thing which is the kind of the way that people act like fat phobia isn't a problem because, they're just concerned. Oh, it's a health thing. It's like, well, lots of things are health things. You don't go up to every smoker and be like, oh, that's bad for you, because they know.
Yeah.
But people feel like they can fat shame people to help them, and it's not helping them because shaming people is not a way to stop anything. Also, people are different shapes and sizes just naturally. At least with Agnes, it doesn't ever seem like it's about foods. There's a little bit of mention about her eating in a healthy way, and it's sort of set against there are ballet dancers in the opera, when the opera house, and they, it sounds like, eat nothing. It sounds like they're constantly starving, and that, as I understand, is an unhealthy thing with certain types of dance.
Yes.
So it's sort of set against that, but for her, there's no jokes about food. But it's this idea that people are just eating too much. But again, it's like, you're not somebody's doctor, you don't get to decide that. And again, does she know how fat she is? Everyone knows. People know. I mean, I've seen people who aren't even fat worry about, I'm having a fat day, I feel a bit fat here now. No, that's not, it's just, it's not great, but it was everywhere in the 90s. I mean, God, people complain about Alicia Silverstone and Kate Winslet being fat. They aren't fat.
No.
And even if they were, that's fine, but we have this horrible skinny obsessed culture, and that always pissed me off, because you and I have always been, like, slim people. I was actually underweight for quite a while as a kid, which I think was a weird sort of immunised me a bit against a lot of the fat shaming, fat phobia in culture, because I was always told, you got to gain weight. And also there's a weird idea that being thin would suddenly solve all your problems. It doesn't. It has problems of its own, but because they're less common, like, you aren't allowed to complain about them and they're fine, And I mean, in fairness, the world is more built for thin people than fat people, but that's a problem with the design of things. Yeah. But it does stop making jokes at Agnes, and Agnes is never shown to be unhealthy. I think it's just how she is.
And I think it's good that it stops there, because I think if it continued throughout the book, it would have felt mean. It would have gone into mean, and
it was starting to feel kind of mean.
But it's not. It's kind of like no.
But then there's Perdita saying things, because that's the other thing with Agnes. You got the Agnes Perdita thing. Is that every so often everyone in the opera house is calling her Perdita. The witches from Lanka are calling her Agnes. But Agnes always tries to be nice and accommodating, and there's that kind of idea of her being a bit of a doormat. That's the other thing. I think a bigger part of her problem is maybe how she's thinking of herself, and I'm sure the fat phobia doesn't help with her confidence, internalised as it is, and we do get it internally. And with Agnes, a lot of stuff is internal, isn't it?
Yes, there's a lot of it, isn't it?
Because at one point, when she starts thinking stuff that's a bit meaner, it's Perdita who's thinking it. Yes. And it's the idea that she's this, like, mean person inside Agnes who says what Agnes would like to say but doesn't, but just in Agnes's head. But there is other sort of fat phobia in there. So there's another character who is an opera singer called Henry Slug, or Enrico Basilica, which is another duality, sort of false, or, well, like, I guess a pseudonym.
It's a mask again.
Yeah. Because his whole thing is he's fat, and no one seems to be judging him for that, which...
No.
Oh, look... Is that a double standard?
I mean, yes. It's one of those. It's one of those men who like their food.
But that's what the whole joke is about: how much he eats.
Yes.
And like, there's a bit where there's a meal and he's eating, like, it's not even touching the sides, and that does start to feel a little bit mean, because he's a fat guy and he sleeps quite a lot, and his main talent seems to be singing. There's a duality there with him, which we'll get to, but it's just the idea that he's just constantly stuffing himself and eating all the stuff, and he does end up being fed a lot of pasta, which is not his preference, but the idea is that he just seems to eat everything, and so that he's either eating or sleeping all the time, and you're like, that's not so great. Although it does sort of say that he's kind of light on his feet, because later when somebody is disguising themselves as him, they don't move right. Yeah. Throughout much of history, being fat's not been a bad thing. And in many parts of the world now, being fat is just a descriptor of how a person is. It's no more loaded than thin, but we have this sort of weird thing in our culture where I think things have improved, and there is understanding stuff like there's something called healthy at every size. Yeah. As long as you're healthy, then that's, and people are different shapes and sizes. That's just how people are. But there's still all this thing, and like, you shouldn't say fat, you should say something else. But in this case, it seems like the book's almost going out of its way. Because again, Nanny at one point is described as being fat. Yes. Described as being short and fat. Which I think is kind of more to kind of set her against Granny being tall and thin. Yeah. It's sort of that, like, duality.
She's kind of that kind of dumpy down, old lady, nanny type.
Yeah. And at one point, Nanny's even thinking about Agnes being fat, but, which just shows, I guess, that, it happens at all levels. But yeah, there is nuance to it, and it is stuff from Agnes's point of view, and as you say, it does sort of stop at some point. Yes. but there are still other kind of
some elements in it, and I think it's...
And the food, the consuming tons of food thing kind of goes to Henry Slug, but that no one's kind of judging him for his looks or stopping him from having a role in the opera for his looks.
Because his voice is what matters in that situation, how he sings.
Whereas, but it doesn't not for the girls.
Yes, I was about to say that, but exactly the opposite for the girls, which is, those saying that, and, they do talk about the grand old days of the opera where they could have had, it's just this modern, and I suppose it's practically kind of throwing a bit of, by saying,
looking at how things are.
Century of the fruit bat, we've got to move with the times, and therefore we have to have...
We have to have a skinny girl who can't sing and then make the fat girl sing for her. Yeah. Because, that's part of the thing, is this... I mean, do we want to go on to Christine, or do we have more on Agnes and Perdita?
I think Agnes and Perdita are an interesting, she's
it's more interesting later, but in this we see the start of it.
Yeah, she's a proto-witch. She goes around doing the witchy things kind of because that's what she's good at.
Well, that's true, because the whole point of her leaving Lanka was because she could tell the witches were interested in her, and she's like, no, I'm not doing that. They're interfering, and they'll make me do it, and they'll trick me into doing it. Like, she clearly massively resents the witches, so when she sees them on the street, she immediately, hides around the corner in horror that they're there. But while she's in the opera, she's just supposed to sing in the chorus, and then she gets told, okay, sing for Christine, which she does. But then she sort of realises that something's happening with Christine's room, and instead of reporting it to anyone, she ends up getting involved, and then she starts investigating.
Yes.
And, she notices, there's a guy, tangled in the lines.
But it talks about whenever she kind of runs across these things, you've got everyone else kind of going, it's the ghost, kind of, fainting. Christine's there fainting multiple times to make sure she's seen.
Well, Agnes's whole thing is that she has a good personality, she's also very practical.
Yes, but she also sees exactly what's going on. She does the witch.
She's clear-sighted,
Yeah, she is the witch in this role. She sees what's going on.
Despite herself.
Yeah, she's there checking, she's going and going, are they actually dead? Yes, they're actually dead. And you pretty much see Nanny do the same later on with another body. It's like coming along going, oh look, they're actually okay, now you've got to come and help the body, get the remove the body, and kind of she's fighting against what she's good at, because I think she's seen it as a kind of the witch thing is a way to not is an option for her, but she doesn't want to be forced into it.
Yeah.
Which is fair enough. We all want to do things on our own.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. But you're right. She is very much showing the practicality. And again, you sort of almost see her slightly resenting that side of herself, like with she feels she has to be the practical one, and she has a good personality, and she's a bit of a doormat, and she'll do what people ask. And I think she doesn't like that about herself to an extent. And I think it gets tied up with how she looks as well.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily the same things. No. I mean, you've got to imagine some of the divas that they mentioned that, in fact, wouldn't have behaved like that, the older ones. So
again, they were busy fainting again. They're there for faint-off con.
This is the thing. It's she's also placed surrounded by a lot of very literally dramatic people, and she's just being level-headed. So I think there's an element of her just wanting to be somewhere else. Because I suppose sometimes she goes somewhere else, and then that's where you sort of see, are you just... It gives you a chance to maybe the point is she's trying to reinvent herself with the name and stuff, but it gives somewhere else to be. But she is still who she is there.
Yeah.
And I think much so she doesn't like some of that. It is what she does, and I think part of it is her coming to terms with that's who she is.
I think
but
it is,
it's fine, but she doesn't have to be a doormat about it.
No.
But the fact that she still kind of is keeping thoughts back, and it's Perdita who thinks in Agnes's head, the meaner stuff. Or, the blunter stuff, maybe. Yeah. If we just talk quickly about Christine.
I mean, she is the opposite.
Well, again, it feels like kind of a quite nice thing. She's the dumb blonde.
Yes.
She's the airhead.
She's there because Daddy has a lot of money and has invested in the opera, and basically as part of that investment.
But she doesn't even seem to know that. And
but
But the whole point with her, and it's only really Bucket and Salzala who know that, but she kind of gloms onto Agnes a bit.
Well, because they're both new people at the same time.
And they've got rooms next to each other. Yeah. But yes, the idea is that everything she says is this exclamation, and she has this little squeaky voice, and everything's exciting, and, But I saw a thing where Pratt said something about having difficulty writing female characters that weren't strong women. But I feel like Christine kind of puts that to lie a bit, because the point is she's purposely a bit like that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't... It feels a bit off, though, because it feels like it's sort of pitting these female characters against each other a bit. So it's like a duality, but not a great one. It's like, Christine's the pretty one, but she's got no talent, but we'll just, everything will be made easy for her because she's, conventionally attractive and skinny and blonde.
And her father has a load of money.
That's only mentioned at the beginning, and it's literally never mentioned again.
I know, but I think...
It is a factor, certainly. Yeah. But...
and then catches the eye of the ghost.
Yeah, because obviously it's based on Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
Which I'm only partly aware of. Yeah, and so the ghost sort of tries to teach her so she can sing the roles, but it ends up being Agnes because Christine just faints away. But there's also the idea that Christine is also very self-absorbed, and also dumb. So if anyone says anything she doesn't understand, it just kind of like goes over her head and she just kind of continues on. Or if anyone says anything that isn't really about her, she just ignores it.
Yeah.
You know, so Agnes will answer her question honestly and then realise that wasn't what Christine wanted. She just wants an opportunity that she could say something. Yeah. And Agnes kind of goes along with it. And Agnes is obviously kind of resentful of Christine, even I think a bit before she gets asked to, you know...
Be her voice.
Yeah, and so I think, and Christine's not an antagonist, but she is obviously supposed to be, like, we're not supposed to think much of her. But I feel like the way we're not supposed to think much of her is uncomfortable. The whole idea about, you know, having a little voice, always being a bit excited and a bit too, you know, I feel like that's something that gets levelled at young women a lot and is used to dismiss. Oh, that's for teen girls. Oh, that, you know. Yeah, young women just have these kind of things. Oh, the way they talk, the way they get overexcited about things.
Let's be honest.
Also, if somebody is pretty, they're also vapid and vain. We're all told that we have to be pretty in order to be accepted. But if you're too pretty, then you're vapid and vain. Like, there's no way to win. And it does feel a little bit like that is what's happening here, but I don't know it's being examined as much as I would personally like.
No, I mean, we all get excited about things. You know, you should hear me talk about giant robots occasionally.
But I think it's just she's been written... It's that whole idea of, you know, the thing where, was it a man will make a sculpture of a beautiful woman, then put a mirror in her hand and call it vanity, but he's the one who made it.
Yeah.
It feels a little bit more like that. Like, quite often when there's criticisms of, like, female characters and stuff, it's like, well, she's not real. I suppose, not to say how people are.
I suppose in this situation, she is there to play off, so it's kind of be the opposite of Agnes.
And to be somebody Agnes has to work around.
And while we get... Agnes and a lot of sort of portrayal of her and sort of about her and as a character, Christine's kind of just a two-dimensional.
Yeah.
If we had some sort of...
There's not even a two to Christine. We're doing twos. She's just Christine. There's just one thing. And I think she's been written single note. I think to show Agnes kind of being a bit of a doormat for her, even so. Yeah. And I mean, there are people who kind of like that, but it just, I don't know, it just feels a bit uncomfortable about it, I think.
I mean, yes,
now, kind of pitting female characters against each other, but there we go. Should we do Nanny Ogg, I think, is the other main character.
Nanny Ogg.
And the cookbook.
The cookbook. Nanny Ogg has written a cookbook. And so she wanted...
I think she wrote a couple, didn't she?
No, she wrote one and wanted to get it bound. So she sent it off to the place in Ankh-Morpork which binds the almanacs. They buy the almanacs from to get a copy bound. God knows how much that, you know, custom print job. That's interesting.
They sent her $3 back.
And it becomes rather popular because of the recipes within it.
We say it becomes rather popular. What happens is, rather than binding it, they publish it, but don't tell her.
Yes. And then because it's very popular because the recipes...
There's obviously a lot of innuendo. I mean, Nanny Ogg's cookbook is also a thing that was written later and exists and one can buy. But yes, the idea is that there's, you know, various... The word aphrodisiac isn't used in the book because I don't suppose either character knows how to spell it.
No.
But yes, and there's also lots of little, I think, hints and tips and relationship advice and all sorts of things in there.
Yeah, just odds and ends in there. So this gets published, but under a... the
name Alanka Witch.
Yes, which obviously when Granny finds out about this, because a load of letters turn up to the Lanka Witch. So the post person, i.e. Sean Ogg, just brings them to Granny because obviously she's the Lanka Witch. And when Granny realises, I think she's a little put out that her reputation is going to be... I
mean, on the one hand, it's a bit presumptuous for her to be the Lanka Witch when there are several of them. And also, I don't think it's not been entirely planned, but it is useful because the whole thing is that Nanny Ogg has for some time now been very worried about Granny because she's... Again, it's the idea of there only being two of them and there should be a free and not having Margaret around. And also the fact that Granny has at this point battled, what is it?
Elves.
Her own evil sister.
She's moved an entire kingdom through time.
She also took on the wizards and the dungeon dimensions.
She borrowed into bees.
Yes. Basically, Granny's done a lot of unprecedented magical stuff, and Black Alice has been mentioned in Cackling. And I think Nanny, keeping an eye on her friend and knowing how powerful she is concerned that she's getting bored in her role, you know, like somebody will come and they'll just want a potion and she has to do a witchy act, but she almost kind of despises people for falling for the act while also realising the act is needed and doing it. Yeah. So, yeah, it's basically, that's when Nanny was kind of looking at Agnes as a potential third witch, but also she needs Granny to have something to do.
Yes.
And Granny decides that she realises Nanny has obviously been absolutely ripped off because she just got her $3 back for the binding and that was it.
Yeah.
And yeah, Granny is good at maths and figures out it must be thousands of dollars, so they're going to Ankh-Morpork.
Yes, to get the money. And if they happen to run into Agnes while they're there, well, you know, that's all well.
I did notice that I suppose we're talking about Granny a little bit now, but she's got a bit of a smaller role. Being Ankh-Morpork does seem to bring out the hustle in her again.
Yes.
Like that, because that I think was the thing behind your earlier Weatherwax theory, is that equal rights Granny seemed a bit too different, a bit too hustly, but actually she's gone back to Ankh-Morpork, she's got the hustle. It must just be the place.
Obviously.
It's obviously doing that to everyone.
Obviously.
Dwarves and trolls and witches are coming down from the mountain, probably all innocent, and then they're there for a week.
And they're just there, But
so this actually shocks Nanny, because Nanny's used to being the wordly wise, many times married, making innuendos, and Granny's the sort of very disapproving spinster lady. But Granny knows Mrs. Palm. She understands what kind of institution Mrs. Palm runs, and it's fine that they stay there. And she just seems a bit more liberated outside Lanka. But I wonder if it's that thing where, sometimes when you go on holiday, you go away, and you just act a bit different than you would at home.
Yeah.
So maybe it's that. Not that Granny did that when they were travelling...
No.
For other places, but there's that kind of weird idea that Ankh-Morpork isn't quite foreign.
Yes.
But anyway,
it's an odd, and she is a very different character in, especially when they're off, spending all, because obviously they get Nanny's money, but in order to
blend in at the opera,
they go and spend it, and it is this when she's got all this money to spend, she's kind of,
but it's not her money.
Yes, it's not her. It's And
I think the thing with Nanny is that it's not just that she was kind of becoming the dog's body, anything that Margaret would have done, Nanny's now doing, because Granny's not gonna. I think it's also that she's worried that her friend could go
a little evil.
Although saying that, this is one of the few witch books that doesn't have the Weatherwax ending.
Yes.
That's so common in others that every time we read one, I'm like, oh no, this is one where she does this. Yes. It's like, Granny didn't have to do some unprecedented bit of magic and trick us all into whether she'd won.
This one is definitely more just a case
it's not a Weatherwax ending.
No, it's just a mask.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting because, Nanny is... I mean, they're both investigating different ways. So Granny's pretending to be some sort of highfalutin lady to get in and speaks to higher ups. But Nanny's just walking in and everyone just accepts her really quickly because she's so personable, and soon she knows everyone's names and she knows, how's your wife's leg and how's your back doing? And, she
giving
just
out tips and, various ointments or
giving them the recipes.
Yes, or recipes, yeah.
And actually there's a point where Granny thinks, this is something not for the first time, that Nanny was actually very powerful. And it's like, Nanny is very powerful, just in a different way, in a less magical. I mean, Granny's very powerful and hides it in a certain way, but Nanny's got a power all her own that's much more social.
Yes, very. She is a matriarch, but she's a sociable matriarch. She knows everyone. She's in everyone's business, but not. She's
like your nice old gran who's also interfering in everything, which I guess you can kind of see why Agnes felt a bit like, oh, that's a lot to be pulled into. I mean, it's a lot to be pulled into. I mean, it weren't great to Margaret last time, so
no.
The
two of them are very, very strong personalities.
Yes, and I mean, part of the point is I think Agnes is still, figuring herself out and is used to being a doormat, and you can see why she was a bit like, oh no, I'm gonna move
we don't
away.
Really get an age for Agnes, I don't think.
Well, she's young.
She's young, but she's not.
She could be 20s.
Yeah, but I think young. Yeah,
I think at most early 20s. Yeah. I wouldn't put any higher than that, and maybe late teens, because again, you've got to remember this is a society where people are kind of growing up a bit earlier than
I'd say
now, or even when we were
late
kids.
Teens is about right.
Yeah.
So you're kind of still finding the shape of your personality where you.
Whereas with Margaret, I think she started off seeming quite young, and it turned out she probably was older than you thought. It was just so often in the company of much older people, she seemed younger by comparison.
Yeah.
Also, I suppose there's that thing where they move the country 14 years into the future, so who knows how old anyone is.
Timey-wimey. History monks.
That's later. But I think we just get, again, a slightly different dynamic where... Well, the dynamic's similar. Granny's still throwing people off, Nanny's still throwing people off in similar ways, but it's just that Granny's throwing Nanny off by being her Ankh-Morpork self, and Nanny wasn't expecting it. I think he's a bit resentful of it.
I think a little bit, because she does end up spending all the money, which I think, but she does get her own back a bit, she does in her own
ridiculous
way.
Meal.
Yes. Not in a mean way, just basically,
I think to show she can.
She still has a little bit of power in the situation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she has quite a lot, though, because you think about it, she goes around kind of being conciliatory to everyone. Yes. That's how she... In a few days, Mrs. Ogg is just one of the people who's at the opera.
I don't think it was days. I think it was hours.
Yes, probably. Did you want to go to some of the other, I guess, dualities with some of the male characters?
Yep.
So we've got Grebo. So Nanny obviously insists that Grebo comes with them. Oh, it seems like he'd be fine in Lanka, but all right. Since the end of Witches Abroad, where he was temporarily turned into a human man to infiltrate a ball. They're always trying to infiltrate fancy places, aren't they?
Do,
but
yes.
they just stole some people's clothes then. But anyway.
Yeah, I can see that being more difficult.
So now there's a thing where sometimes if Gruber's cornered not happy, part of his, with the usual defence systems he's got, which I think is like being a horrendous, terrifying fighter, because there's the idea he could chase off wolves and bears and bulls.
Yeah.
But now he seems to have turned human in his arsenal because it's happened once. So every so often he turns
this morphogenic field flips, and next thing you know is...
We've mentioned the human cat, and now the dog's next door.
Yes, they obviously have heard.
There's no real cats here.
No.
The idea is that Grebo's always Grebo, whether he's a cat or a man. It's just when he's a man, everything's more confusing and complicated, and he has to wear... Although they even get him a fancy outfit, including with an eye patch.
Oh, yeah.
But he talks oddly, so it's a bit kind of like a hissing sort of sound. He doesn't know many words.
I think he's a fun character to have around, and add a little extra chaos to the mix.
This is a very chaotic book. Like the whole, I mean, there's one book. There's like opera is chaos, and it just seems like it's constant.
The
chaos.
show must go on.
Yes, just chaotic stuff happening all the time, even before people start being murdered. Which again, you think more people have been like racing out of there, but they don't.
The show must go on.
Yeah, it's just something bigger to, I guess, faint and have histrionics about.
Yeah.
But Grebo, much like Nanny, ends up kind of establishing himself. So he's in the kitchen a bit, and then it's sort of some characters, sort of how people react to him as a cat. And,
yes.
We'd already mentioned Henry Slug / Enrico Basilica. So Henry Slug was, I think, a working class boy from Ankh-Morpork who had the talent for singing, and then became an opera singer. But it's always better if you're from somewhere far away. So he came up with the name Enrico Basilica, who's from Brindisi, which I guess is Discworld, Italy.
Yep.
So he pretends he doesn't know Morporkian.
Yes, he can't speak Morporkian. He has to have...
So he has a translation, even though he does know it. But Nanny and Granny end up meeting him in the coach, and he's sort of like quietly, they help him out, and he's like, "Oh, you've earned my thanks, but don't say my name." And then later they realise he's pretending. And at one point he's singing music hall songs, and then as soon as somebody's near, he suddenly switches into Italian opera, which I'm sure references something. Because there is mention of music hall stuff in this a bit.
Yes.
The idea that Henry moves away, and then he's having to constantly pretend, and I think even his translator...
The interpreters know. Yeah, it's the idea that he's made this persona for himself in order to become this famous opera singer, to do what he loves, but he can't do it as himself. He has to do this as...
Now.
Yeah, and everyone keeps bringing him plates of pasta, and he hates pasta. He
clearly eats it, though.
Yes.
But he does want potatoes and...
He just wants
dumplings.
good old Ankh-Morporkian food, which I think is your classic stodgy British...
Oh, yeah.
Fair.
I mean, a lot of words mentioned, they all sound like stodge.
Yeah. I mean, stodge can be good, but,
But, yeah, so that's kind of a bit of a duality thing. There's also the fact that, again, part of the idea that's mentioned in this is that plotlines in opera don't make any sense and they're all a bit silly and all these weird coincidences. I get the impression it's like even more so than Shakespeare. Not that I'm somebody who knows much about opera, but at the end, a slide thing is that there's a guy who's trying to go up in the world in the law firm he works in, so he's brought his mother to the opera. He got tickets from one of the partners, so he's brought his mother to the opera. And his
mother who loves music halls.
Yes, and she's like, why isn't this like the music hall? And then, because this thing, obviously opera is supposed to be a very high class, but Pratchett references other stuff. So there's one bit where she says, seeing somebody sing the song, she sits among the carrots and leeks, which is a reference to an actual musical song that she had a song called She Sits Among the Carrots and Leeks. And she thought that was a bit rude, so she changed it, she sits amongst the carrots and peas. this lad called Henry, is trying to go off the world, but has brought his mother along because, again, he's one of those people who doesn't seem to know other women. And then at the end, it's revealed that the mother is actually the girl that Henry Slug left behind, and always thought he'd go back to, but never did because of his opera, and that presumably, therefore, the sort of social climbing like law firm lad is actually his son.
Yes, because it's like as you hear them going off together, and she said, "Henry, you know I told you that your father was," and he's sitting there with basically he's ordered a pamphlet on what the plot for the opera is, so that he can make sure he understands what's going on, and then he's also got a thesaurus basically next to him as well to
a dictionary to look up the
words he doesn't understand.
Yes, yeah. Oh, and also the idea of how ridiculous it is that all this stuff's happening on stage and all the audience are going, "Is this the opera?" Yes, this will be the opera. That's right. Yeah, the opera's
this includes like this includes a chase over the chandelier.
Yes,
the giant chandelier.
Looking at
and expecting to fall throughout the thing, which is fair enough. It was a giant chandelier, and that's kind of your. Yeah,
that's
we kind of expect
there,
it to,
Well, it's just the fact that everyone's there. having a moment like, oh, this seems odd. Like, oh no, that's just how opera is. And then as soon as somebody says it, everyone thinks that. Yeah. But it did also make me think of, so in what was originally the final episode of Futurama before they did the later episodes of like the new series, which has the opera that Fry writes. There's a bit where like the robot devil comes on stage and says he's going to marry Leela and to get at Fry, and everyone in the audience is like, is this real or being staged? You know, like no one's quite sure if that's actually what's supposed to be happening.
Yes, all very strange. Right, other characters, other duality characters.
Well, I suppose we have Salazar and Bucket or the Ghost.
Well, we could just Salazar and Bucket, you know. Salazar, as we say, we're pretty sure is the creative director. He's like the number 2 in the, you know, you've got the owner, which is Mr. Bucket. He's the one with the purse strings. Whereas Salazar is there kind of running everything. And he's the one, so it's always him and Bucket in the office, and Bucket trying to figure out what's happened. But every time he's looking at the books, oh, something's happened. Oh, there's a catastrophe. Oh, someone's been murdered. So he never quite has a chance to look at it. All he can see is that the opera that he thought must be doing really well, because people are paying so much money to go, is leaking money everywhere because no one's kept the books, but he can't look at them for any time. And then Salzella and Undershaft, is it? Yes. Before Undershaft is murdered, will quite often come to him and sort of explain about how various things are, you know, but they're all involved in casting. Yeah, there's a lot of chats. Bucket's trying to view it as a business because he used to work in cheese. He used to work in dairy products, you know, and he thought that was a bit tricky. And then he doesn't realise, you know, at least cheese is fairly dependable. And Salazar's always telling him how chaotic it is and how there's always a problem and it's always things very chaotic happening and trying to get everything together, but it always does come together in the end. Which is interesting because earliest there we were able to do like an open day backstage tour thing of a local theatre, and the woman at the sort of stage manager or deputy stage manager station was explaining about how much stuff has to come together just for getting people on the stage. And this is the thing, like this just seems like a lot of stuff's happening all at once, no one's sure what's happening, but she was saying, you know, everyone's got like every entrance to the stage has a light and you have to confirm you're there and then you have to go on. It's like nobody moves unless they're told to because they could get hit by scenery or something. It's like a Formula 1 pit stop. Oh, okay. Well, I thought my thing's closer, but sure. I've got lights everywhere. Don't go to you. Got to sit there. You got to sit into this. Do you mean lights for the car? Yeah. No, this like there's lights for the pit crew and anyone who goes anywhere. Like the point is anyone who goes on the stage, there's all the stuff because obviously there's stuff flying about. But she's also saying like the stage manager. As soon as that's where the stage manager goes, like the stage manager doesn't have a location. They're just constantly roving, doing stuff. If somebody's ill, if somebody's injured, if anything happens to them, which you know. So it does sound like there's a lot of stuff happening. And she was saying something. Yeah, you would have to kind of like the kind of panic and the you know of the performance happening. So but clearly they're the people who are keeping a clear head for it and getting things sorted, which I feel like this lacks, which is probably why it seems so chaotic. And also it's not a surprise people are being injured and stuff, but I feel like it's a surprise it's murders rather than just stuff not being done well. Because there's obviously a ton of moving parts, because you know there's the ballet dancers, there's the chorus, there's the main singers, there's the musicians, and you've got the set dressers, the props people, the costume people, the makeup people. I mean, we saw all of these things, and where we went wasn't an opera house, it was a theatre as well. Yeah, so and it's obviously huge. You know, it's a huge undertaking, which you know Mr. Bucket hadn't realised, but Salzala may be kind of egging things over a bit. But yes, it's this idea that you know Bucket's this very sensible businessman. He's just who quite likes the opera, and this would be a fun thing to be involved in. Like he himself is perhaps not dramatic or creative, but you can still enjoy it. And sometimes you want to promote these things or fund these things because you enjoy them. That's good. That's what we want. That's the kind of rich person you want, really, isn't it? Not that I'm sure he's rich. I think he got investors in, but he's a business guy, and Salzala's a bit like, no, that's not how it is at all. No. Although Salzala is unreliable. Yes. Well, should we talk about the ghost more generally? Yes, I mean, there's the organ repair guy. Andre, yes. Because we have a few cast of characters that we come across. So Andre is one of them. He seems to be kind of sensible. Yes, but working prime. Yeah, I can't even remember exactly what his role is, but he's some sort of music person and he plays the organ. Yeah, and then he gets librarian as a ringer. And then you have Walter is sort of general handyman, janitorial. There we go. Yeah, and his mother does various front of house things. She's sort of like she kind of waitresses for the boxes. Well, that's the point we made at our local theatre, actually, that it wasn't a huge auditorium. Also, there were no boxes and all the seats are designed to give everyone the same good view of the stage, which isn't common in a lot of theatres. And I thought, that's nice. Yeah. But anyway, yes, there's all the boxes where the posh people are. Yeah, so Mrs. Plinge, so she's obviously been, around doing this kind of front of house stuff pretty much all of her life. And there's her son, Walter. And Walter is somebody who does seem to be
Well, I mean, he's obviously not neurotypical. Not that that was much of a phrase when the book was written, but he's obviously he's kind of seen as this slightly odd guy. He's always sweeping or doing sort of odd jobs. He's a bit of a jobs body, as you say, janitor. Yeah. He's quite often treated not very nice by
it's quite big, yeah.
by various of the cast who, you know, well, again, I think there's a lot of people aren't particularly pleasant about a lot of big personalities, and yeah, so those, and again, so that sort of shows maybe more the kind of more regular folk.
Yeah.
Of the opera. And then there's the Ghost, who's always called the Ghost with a capital G.
Yes, of course.
They never use any synonym for Ghost.
No.
Any other word for Ghost. It's not that. But yes, and there's the Ghost seems to be this long established thing. You know, there's Ghost.
Always, yeah, there's always been, and it brings good luck.
Well, it's good luck or bad luck. So it's like, anything goes wrong, it was Ghost. If something's been damaged, it was the Ghost. If somebody's lost something, it was the Ghost. Oh, if the thing is found, that was the Ghost. If this goes well, that was the Ghost. Yes. The Ghost is basically the spirit of a lot of people incredibly superstitious, all working in a building together.
And you can never, box 8 has always got to be left empty.
On the first night. Because the Ghost has it.
Yeah. But the reason they put so much faith in it is because if you do a good job, these dead roses would appear.
If the lady does particularly well in her first performance, then yes, she gets these
bouquet of dead roses, and these notes keep appearing in around Mr. Bucket. Basically,
well, no, they tend to be brought to him or something, don't they? Oh no, he gets an envelope.
Yes, he finds so there's two sets of notes, but these were, and they're very polite and saying with suggestions about how to run the opera, and usually suggesting that Christine does particular roles.
And then Agnes has the thing where Christine hears something in her room, which has a big full-length mirror, gets a bit freaked out, goes to Agnes, and Agnes sort of says, "Oh, well, you can stay here." Then Christine just goes to sleep in her bed right away. So Agnes goes sees there's a glow behind the mirror, and then basically a voice starts, explaining how to do the role that Christine's been casted the next night. So Agnes does it, but obviously Agnes is already a brilliant singer. Yeah. So it's clear, the ghost is obviously manipulating things, but it's also kind of, anything could be the Ghost.
Yes. But also, we importantly, though, have the second notes. And the second notes tend to be found on the dead bodies.
And they have a lot of exclamation marks. I mean, everything Christine says ends in an exclamation mark, including an exclamation mark and question mark, because I guess Interrobang hadn't been.
But these are where if it says 5 exclamation marks, that's the sign of a sick mind. So it's usually they just say "arg" with exclamation.
Or it's like "ah ha 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 ha." Yeah. The point is somebody's writing out maniacal laughter.
Yes. True. So there's
it's like the bad guy in that Muppets film where he just has maniacal laugh.
So there's these two. There's a duality in the Ghost. The
murders have only started reasonably recently.
Yeah. So there's the side that is the Ghost, the killer Ghost, but then there's also this opera Ghost.
Ghost who seems to just be part of the place and then turns murderous, or does it? Because yes, it's that duality thing. And there's a bit later on. So the Watch are called. The Watch had already been aware. They are called. So Corporal Nobbs and is the detritus a sergeant at that point? Or is he still Corporal?
I can't remember.
The detritus are there, looking very obviously like watchmen, but supposedly undercover.
Because the detritus is still wearing his badge.
And actually, Nanny talks to Nobby, which I had forgotten, and that's kind of like, Nanny's talking to the Watch. That's kind of fun. But yes, this idea that they're the most obviously watchmanish, watchmen tending not to be watchmen people that you could have, which then is a decoy from it's Cable Street Particulars, isn't it? Which is a new thing we've heard of, but basically Vimes having some sort of undercover unit that need to investigate stuff without obviously being watchmen.
Yes.
Which is interesting, but at least I'd sort of forgotten this is where that started.
Yeah, because you got these handful of characters in the background, so obviously someone has to be the Ghost, and I think they're playing up Andre to be the Ghost for a long time.
This is the thing, when Agnes is looking around and noticing things and being level-headed, Andre also seems to be doing that. And there's a bit where Andre he's kind of want to spend time with her a little bit. And I wasn't sure if it was going to be something romantic, although Agnes is obviously a bit, wary about it. But it's just that he seems to be kind of... I mean, Agnes is sneaking around a bit.
Yeah.
And that's how because she hears singing from the stage, and there's hardly anyone about. So then she has a theory about who the ghost could be, and everyone says, "Oh no, it can't be that." And then for a bit she thinks it's Andre, but then what we discover is that Andre is actually a policeman. He's this Cable Street guy, so he's actually investigating, whereas Agnes is just doing it out of the natural curiosity of someone destined for witchery.
Yes.
But there's a bit where, after Andre's revealed who he is, and he's talking to Granny and Agnes, and he's sort of going through things, and says, "Oh no, well, it can't be that guy, because the ghost's been seen at the same time as him." And Granny asks him how he recognises the ghost. Like, "Oh, he's wearing a mask." And Granny looks at him and is like, "Just think about what you're saying. You recognise him because you can't see his face." And again, going in the sort of twos, the idea is that, there are two ghosts.
Yes.
Which explains the two different tones of the notes. And, that somebody is using the well-established ghost to, do murders.
To cover them stealing money. Because it all comes down to money.
It's very weird, isn't it? So
it is covering the money. So the rat catcher guy gets killed because he's found the
stash of money.
Yeah.
What about the guy who was in the flies and was almost killed but not quite? I think you don't want to spot it. Because the music director guy gets killed because he goes into the wrong room and sees who it is.
Yes.
And there's lots of the practice does with kind of theatricality and sleight of hand. So there's a bit where they find the guy's glasses, like, well, where's he? And then they just all look at the double bass case, because that's the only thing big enough to put a person in. And there's a moment they're like, and you're led to think, oh, the body's in the double bass, and then you open it up and no, the instrument's in there.
The double bass is in there, yeah.
But the idea that it could have been that, and that actually characters notice each other thinking that, and they sort of call it out. And it's this sort of theatrical expectation, but then he is found later. But yes, I suppose it's if anyone kind of gets close to the guy.
Yeah, it is.
But there's also the fact that a murder keeps happening, and the when the owner's doing the book, something always comes up, touches a murder that stops him from looking any further into the accounts, which all he can see are a complete mess.
Well, I mean, they are. I mean, when Granny takes a look at them, she figures it out pretty quickly because, as you said,
suddenly a maths whiz, as it turns out.
I don't think she notices things. It's not about maths. It's about how many things are entries.
Her figuring it, well, kind of, but her figuring out Nanny's stuff was also quite good maths. The point is she's quick at maths. You start to be good at maths for this sort of thing. But yes, there's people obfuscated things and
so on one page it was you're paying out for X number of ballet shoes, and on the next page is you're paying out for X number of ballet shoes again, or it's just there are multiple entries, but they're over the page and things. So money has gone. That's where all the money is going. Most of it is being secreted away in the basement.
One theory that Agnes had early on was that the ghost was Walter Plinge, this odd job little man. And everyone's like, no, it can't be Walter, that's ridiculous. And Agnes is almost convinced, because she's sort of like, she's seen him about when there's been mysterious singing and what's that. And the whole thing with Walter is that he sort of walks in this really kind of like odd, Pratchett often describes people having odd walks.
Yeah.
And Walter seems to have this. But again, the duality, once he puts on the mask, suddenly he stands properly and he's very acrobatic and finesse. But I think the whole point is that Walter has been brought up in the opera, that he is the
so I think this is the
spirit of the opera.
I think this is the thing with this. So this is a story about. So there's not really magic in this, despite the fact that the ghost can do some very impressive physical things, but because that's almost in the theatrical. This is again perhaps another example of on the disc where expectations of things happening
belief of stuff,
yes, as kind of built up again, and Walter has lived. Has been born and raised in the opera. He spends
in the opera house. Yeah.
Yes, he spends his time in the basement amongst the sort of the dead scenery and props. I mean, he's got.
There's a bit where it shows that he's writing all these ideas, and then Pratchett just like writes things like several different musicals.
Yes,
and I mean some musicals are operettas like Les Mis, but then there's stuff about there's stuff suggesting stuff like Singing in the Rain a bit, and
there's something. But but the idea is this: he's become. Yes, you're right. He's embodied that spirit of opera. He is the opera. Which I find is quite interesting, that and again once he puts on the mask he changes from this mild mannered, so rather than throwing his glasses away, so he's just putting mild. I mean, he must save on glasses.
Well, yeah. Well, no, there's a thing where you actually eventually see the mask go on and he completely changed posture. But there's a thing, I think it's a story by David Bowie where he said something to a kid who wasn't very confident. He said something about wearing a mask all the time. It's like, here you go. And he sort of minds taking off a mask and putting it on this kid. But it kind of goes to that headology thing.
I mean, for David Bowie and masks, I mean, that's huge. I mean, I think it is. I mean, it is an interesting idea that we had, how people wear masks. We all wear masks in some respects.
Yes, yeah.
But it's just a very different,
very literalised version of it. And again, the whole point of stuff like the opera or theatre, they do say a couple of points how it's different to theatre, but, performing arts is that, a lot of it is creating illusion. And again, we saw some of that today. They were talking about painting the scenery and saying, well, it doesn't have to look good up close, but you need to be able to go back and see what it looks like from, past the stage and with the lights on it. And so... yeah, it's very Dionysian.
But I think, and you definitely see that at the end, this dramatic ending where everyone's They're all on stage, because it happens on stage in the middle of an opera, of course,
yeah.
you know. And it turns out that in the end that it's Salazar is the one.
Yes, Salazar was doing it, which is not surprising, because he was often very mean with his humour. You know, like he made a lot of...
He was the one that says about how fat Angus is.
Agnes is. And so, but there's various points where he's making snide sort of little comments about people, and then when there is a murder, he's quite often the one who makes some sort of little quip about it, and then somebody else will be like, well, that seems in poor taste. Yeah. So he was really kind of quite an unpleasant character, although he sort of seemed to have become a bit of a confidant for Mr. Bucket just because he was about, but he kind of inveigled his way into that. But yes, he's the one who's been skimming the money off, although for some reason he never ran away with it, which is weird. By
the sounds of it, he had a really lot of money down there.
You could have just gone.
Yeah, I don't know what he didn't know where to cut his losses.
Well, I think it's that he's also part of the opera. This thing, because he seems very scornful and scathing about how the opera is and how silly everyone is and how they're all so dramatic and such chaos. But I think he's just a messy bench that likes drama. Yeah. To be honest, because he does seem to kind of thrive on it. I think he enjoys rising above it and being the one who's very scornful, looking at everything, but also like doing murders. But I think the money was probably just a way of keeping score. Yeah. To be honest, I think this is the thing. The motive. This thing. The end is very silly. Well, it's all a bit silly and all a bit over dramatic and stuff. But I think the point is it's mirroring an opera.
Yes, I mean because they end up having this big fight on stage between the Salazar and Waterpinch as the ghost. But at no point, but it's all stage fighting. At no point that they're just there hitting their swords against each other and making and we get the granny bit where Walter's mask gets broken and she basically kind of puts the invisible mask on, then so that you can
that's why I thought the Barry story
and then but in the end Salazar gets run through, and by run through it means the sword goes under his arm
because it's stage fighting
and he goes and basically he takes a good 5 minutes to die because
it says earlier on it's like people in opera is killed by something allows them to sing for 5 minutes
and it is just silly.
I mean that's kind of the thing in some Shakespeare stuff. That's always my problem with the end of Othello, because when I was studying Othello in sixth form I was also working as a lifeguard, and you perfectly was like, if you can breathe then you've not been killed.
And obviously at the end, in fact right at the end you have the Henry Slugg's family reunion, which is very dramatic,
brief, but it's
kind of filling that opera and you get this satisfactory ending where kind of everyone gets Mr. Bucket will now get an opera
that actually runs in some sort of business-like manner
because Walter is now Walter as fully as the ghost will be able to help him,
but actually out in front rather than hiding away and having this sort of double
Henry Slug will go off and have a happy life with and hopefully get to sing as much as he likes. You presume most of the people, in the opera, you don't really know how Christine's going to come out of this.
She'll probably just be fine.
Yeah, but she will. Yeah, Nanny and Granny head back to Lanka and
having spent a small fortune.
Yes, with nothing much really to show.
Having
for
gained
it.
And then spent a small fortune, but mostly on schemes.
And
although I mean, the thing is, had either of them gone back to Lanka with that money, it probably would have upended the entire economy. Yes. Sometimes if an individual gets too much money and then takes it somewhere, it literally causes. That's happened multiple times in history.
Nanny was very happy with her $3 back, and she stuck it in a box in the chimney. She was
several chimneys for her.
She wasn't going to, the idea of what to do with the money. She didn't really, And we get a bit where Granny is talking to Agnes about what she's going to do next. But it's very much not, you can do it, not you must come back and be a witch. It's like, just do what you want, you can. And, obviously, eventually, Agnes does make her way back to Lanka, visits Granny and talks about it, but it's very much like, you could do us a favour and just air out Magrat's cottage, you could.
And this is what Agnes wanted to avoid. She knew she'd be manoeuvred into it, but I think because she knew that was going to happen, her coming back shows, well, she knows it's going to happen, so it's kind of her giving some sort of assent to it rather than just being bullied into it.
She has the agency of it rather than you will do it. Anyway, I think we should start wrapping it up. I would like to say we do get a brief librarian interlude in this because there's an organ. This being an organ which is either a prototype or an offshoot of the organ from the.
Well, it was also a Bloody Stupid Johnson.
Yes, it's the Bloody Stupid Johnson organ. And he was talking, and it's just this idea, this giant, ridiculous organ, and the orangutan playing it during the opera, and very upset that it doesn't have the chicken noises, and the... he'll have to make do without the extra.
Yeah.
Which I always like to see the librarian in things. I mean, enjoying the arts.
Like you say, it's telling a story, and I think it's riffing off of a load of opera stuff. I mean, there were various things that obviously felt a bit like they were references to things, but not like it wasn't packed full. Like,
it wasn't
like moving pictures,
all soul music. It wasn't. It wasn't an opera joke for around every corner, unless of course it was, and we just know nothing. We know nothing about opera, so it just.
I'm not big though. There are bits I sort of reference, or something where I'd sort of see something like, I think that's a reference to something.
I think that he referenced the things that people knew about. So it was the Ring saga, and with Valkyries with the horned helmets gets a mention, and a few things like that. But
I feel like my knowledge of opera is most of that Bugs Bunny cartoon,
which may
and that episode of Futurama. I mean, and the fact that he also, he references musical stuff, which we'd slightly more, even though that's a much deader art form. We also get a bit of stuff about printing, though, as well.
Sure, yes, we do.
So, we might mention that in Ankh-Morpork, because obviously Granny feels like she sent it to printers or engravers. There's a bit where it says that movable type isn't allowed because the wizards don't like it.
Yeah.
Which, okay. But engraving is fine. So the point is everyone's doing kind of like a wood cut and then pressing it. So they do have presses, but they have to be engraved. But they must also have cheap paper.
Yes, because they talk about the almanacs, which everyone gets, the Lanka gets every single year.
Well, everyone did get almanacs, but almanacs,
But they talk about how thin the paper is.
Yeah, well, this is and it's another sign of Pratchett not being precious about stuff. Obviously he's a big believer in books and story, but he's not precious about books as physical objects, because several times, he has, in other books as well, he has characters mention, something with thin pages, and the idea is, it's also loo paper, because it's a source of paper. But that does show that cheap paper is available, because one of the reasons in Europe that, I say book, but like the codex version of the book that we all have now that replaced the scroll, one of the reasons that, those were such prized objects was because in Europe it was made with vellum, and that was very expensive because you had to kill an animal and not use the skin for something else useful. But they obviously have in Ankh-Morpork some form of cheap paper. They obviously have some form of press because they've been able to sell so many copies of Nanny's cookbook. But they don't have movable type. But Pratchett also seems to hand-wave that, the engravers do it, and they just engrave each plate because the wizards don't like movable type. And it sort of lets it go, but I think obviously that comes up a bit more later on, But it's just that the press kind of does exist.
It does kind of fill in that.
And books are sort of, they're not quite mass market yet, but they're...
It does kind of fill in those holes you get, because obviously I expect, most of the Wizards books, they're handwritten, that's the
old thing, it was the illuminated manuscript and you had monks doing it.
But there many times they've talked about various pamphlets that have been produced.
So it's probably a bit like, because you had in the sort of 1600s, you had like a lot of pamphleteering stuff, and there's a lot of stuff like that, like in the run-up to the Civil War, the British Civil War, or the War of Three Kingdoms, I think is what we're supposed to call it now. They keep sort of slightly changing the name of it. But there was a lot of pamphleteering going on, so
But but obviously we haven't.
You think like Dibble was printing those T-shirts and moving pictures.
But we haven't got
soul music. But there was a troll doing that.
But we haven't got to newspapers yet, which is a whole it's a whole different thing.
But
which requires really movable type. So obviously the technology is there, but it's just
there's sort of a bit of a prohibition on it.
Yeah.
Oh, another bit I made a note on, because there's quite a lot of funny bits, but there aren't many that are just jokes so much, I think.
Yeah.
But there's a bit where it sort of says about Nanny having a still out in the woods, which Kim Brents told her to do. It's like, well, it's fine if you do it, but you shouldn't really do it like in your house. So it's out in the woods, which just adds a bit of mystique to her moonshine. But it's the fact that she makes her own scumble, and it's known as Suicider. Oh, it's very West Country.
Yes. But there we go. So I think we have enjoyed this one.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's definitely a nice light relief after the last one.
Yeah.
So I think we're quite pleased with that. So, and I think it's another solid Witches one.
It's a good solid one. I think it just hasn't stuck out as much as some of the others, I think. But no, it was quite fun reading it.
I think it's also low stakes for Witches, really.
Again, Growing Weatherwax hasn't had to use some sort of incredibly impressive magic against some sort of opponent that thinks they've got her.
Yeah.
So, but as you say, it's less of a magical book. So.
Yeah, it's kind of so. But yeah, so that's good. Right then, so next time we'll be talking about Feet of Clay. Thank you all very much for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you for listening to Dining Table Discworld. You can find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Dining Table Discworld. You can also find us on BlueSky at dtdiscworld. All our other contact information and credits for our music can be found in our show notes. Thank you for listening again, and we'll see you in our next episode.